and we're going to have another session of Understanding Anger 2.0. And while people are streaming in, I'll tell you a little bit. What's going on? Looks like we're kind of stuck here. Okay, it just updated. It looks like the internet is a little bit glitchy here on our end. Hopefully, everybody is seeing this all right. I'm seeing the time tick a little bit weirdly, jumping forward by 5 seconds at a time. But be that as it may, there may be some interference in the interwebs. Let's see how things are going to go. So, what is Understanding Anger 2.0? This came out of a class that I was teaching at Marquette University that has to do with anger and how we should understand the phenomenon of anger, what it means for us as human beings, whether anger is good or bad, and bringing to bear a whole bunch of useful resources from philosophy, literature, psychology, theology, a bunch of different disciplines. This session is going to be about two important plays, two tragedies coming from the classical period. We looked at Aeschylus last time and three of his plays. This time around, we are going to be looking at Sophocles, the next great Athenian playwright, and then we'll look at Euripides. And so we've got these two really central plays for understanding how anger works and the dangers involved in it. The Ajax, which is about one of the great heroes of the Trojan War, who ends his life after the war. And then Medea, which is actually happening before that, but is written as a play later on. And so Understanding Anger, this whole series, we did a earlier version of this for the Kingston Public Library back in, was it 2015, and we decided to restart this. And there have been a couple interruptions to it, but we've gotten underway again. So we'll be walking our way this year through a lot of Greek and Roman thinkers talking about anger, some of them philosophical, some of them poetic, which Greek tragedy certainly is, some of them perhaps even theological. And then we're going to go into a whole bunch of other venues and traditions and works. So let's talk first about these plays. As I mentioned, we looked last time at Aeschylus's Oresteia trilogy, which has to do with the House of Atreus. They are going to play a role in these plays that we're looking at here, the Ajax, because Agamemnon, who's kind of a jerk, and Menelaus, who's a different kind of jerk, are both antagonistic and antagonizing not just Ajax, but also his brother. So we're going to be looking at how those two fit in. And I do want to point out that both with the Ajax and the Medea, because they're plays, they're not philosophical treatises or even rhetorical speeches or anything like that. They're not giving us a theoretical exposition or discussion or analysis of how anger works. They're taking it for granted that we understand this emotion to some degree, and they are depicting it and having the characters talk about who's angry and over what and what they're going to do because of the anger. And we're also not getting a lot of lists of practices or things that we can do to lessen or control our anger, but we're going to see a model of it, at least in one of these plays, with what it is that Odysseus himself does. But I think that we're getting some really great depictions of anger. And we could say that each of these plays is also providing us with something like a lesson about how to um, how to avoid falling into these kinds of tragic, and they really are tragic situations, and then what can we do within them? So, the times and places of these peoples are the actual writing of it is happening in ancient Athens, but the times are much earlier in what we could call the heroic or Bronze Age. And you notice that there's not a lot of idealizing going on in these. These are times of brutal warfare between other people, entire cities, entire nations fighting against each other. The gods themselves get involved and really mess things up for people from time to time as well. And we're going to look at how this plays out in just a moment. I do want to highlight a couple key themes. Now, these are key themes not just for this session, but for other sessions as well, where we're looking at, let's call it, literary depictions of anger. So we want to think about why people get angry, what causes the anger response. And, we can also think about whether it's a right response, a just response, an appropriate response, or whether these people getting angry in the way that they do and behaving in the way that they do, whether it's going too far or too easily aroused. We also want to think about the depictions of how anger works in a person experiencing it. I would say that this is particularly important with Medea, who is going to talk about being moved by her thumos, a term that we've encountered a lot before, and knowing that it is going to steer her the wrong way, but not being able to bridle it. Um, we also encounter, we could say, a morality of anger, or multiple moralities of anger. As we said, maybe anger sometimes isn't the appropriate response to the insults, to the belittling, to the slighting that's taking place. And this highlights the relationship between anger and emotion, justice and injustice, reasoning. These people explain what it is that they're angry about. They don't just have something happen to them and then start punching people. They're actually setting out what they're angry about and what they're going to do about it. And then finally, this is quite important. We see that anger doesn't exist in a vacuum. We often get angry because of what other angry people do. And so this is going to be another really key theme. Anger tends to spread itself within multiple subjects who are related to each other. And very often, the retaliation or vengeance or retribution that the angry person is seeking, if they're successful in seeking it, or even unsuccessful, as we're going to see with Ajax, in seeking it, may arouse the anger on the part of other people. So let's jump into the Ajax, because we could say Medea narratively comes first, but Sophocles is writing before Euripides is. So this play is taking place, as most Greek tragedies do, within a very, very narrow time frame. And it's the aftermath of a slaughter that the great hero Ajax, who's one of the most important heroes on the Greek side in the Trojan War. We have Achilles, we have Odysseus, we have Diomedes, we have a few other people, and then we have Ajax. And Ajax is depicted as this massive giant of a man who, with his mighty shield and spear, is able to slaughter Trojans. He actually stands up against Hector in single combat, and he's left as one of the survivors at the end of the Trojan War after Troy has been sacked. And what he ends up doing is getting very, very angry and deciding upon revenge. Now, why does he do this? Well, Achilles, who was, supposedly the greatest of the Greek heroes, and, we could think of him as not necessarily like a superhero above Ajax, but they're kind of similar in level. Achilles has died. Achilles um, has been, shot in the Achilles tendon, and knowing that going and facing Hector would lead to his own death, he's gone and chosen this path of glory, and now the question is, all right, who is going to get Achilles' armor and weapons? And this is a big deal because these are trophies. These are things that are valuable, that tell people who you are and what you're worth, right? So Achilles has left behind this, we could say, bone of contention. And Achilles was, he didn't really like Agamemnon, but he's friendly with the rest of the Greek heroes. And Agamemnon is the war leader. Menelaus is his brother. And the two of them, the Atreides, the sons of Atreus, right, of that house, are going to award the armor, but not to Ajax. They're going to award it to somebody who is kind of a rival of Ajax, Odysseus. And, why would they give it to Odysseus? Odysseus is the guy who comes up with the stratagem that leads to the successful resolution, at least for the Greeks, very unsuccessful for the Trojans, of the war. And so Ajax views this as a dishonoring, as an insult to him, and he resolves to um, go and take vengeance. And we get this explanation from Athena. She's saying what happened. Um, so Ajax decides that in the middle of the night, motivated by anger, in Greek, holos, right, a term that we've encountered many times before in these sessions when looking at Homer and Hesiod and some of the other authors. Ajax is weighed down by his anger, and he decides that what he's going to do is, in the middle of the night, sneak into the Greek camp where he's already a member. Right? They're spread out in their tents all over the place. He is with his fellows from his hometown of Salamis, and he's going to take captives, not of the Trojans, but of the Greeks. And the captives that he's going to take are going to be the ones who have injured his honor, the ones who have slighted him: Agamemnon, Menelaus, and in particular, Odysseus. What Athena does is places Ajax into a temporary state of insanity where he feels his anger, but his reason, his sensibility has been taken from him. And so instead of getting these human beings, he actually takes the animals that are part of the spoils of war, cattle and sheep and stuff like that. And he leads them, it also mentions dogs, leads them into his tent, and he engages in a horrible and dishonorable slaughter of all of these animals. So this is, an attempt that goes astray, an attempt to impose retribution or vengeance on the Greeks, and we wind up getting a bunch of characters either witnessing this or being told about this, and then Athena is going to give Ajax back his mind. And when this happens, we're going to see that there's let's call it a shaming, an embarrassment, a pain that will take place on Ajax's part. And it's very interesting. The character Odysseus, who is, favored by Athena, loved by Athena, really, is not willing to participate in the um, what would you call it? The joy that Athena is taking in the downfall of Ajax. And we're going to find out there's a little bit of bad blood between the two of them. So Athena is inviting Odysseus to go, and she's like, check this guy out. Let's go in the tent. And Odysseus is like, I don't want anything to do with that. Um, he he says, I know that this guy hates me, but I also feel pity for him. And Odysseus is going to say, I see that all we who live are nothing more than phantoms or fleeting shadows. So he's got a sort of practical wisdom about things. And Athena says, the day can press down on all human beings and a day can raise them up, but the gods embrace men of sense and abhor the evil. So there's some interesting wisdom being conveyed here. And then we get a scene shift. Ajax and his people are going to be the subject of that. So we have the chorus, and the chorus here is Ajax's fellow soldiers from his hometown. And they want to know what god has led him astray. And they mention that the Greeks are now slandering him and his concubine, Tecmessa, whose family Ajax has actually killed. And he's taken her as a prize and impregnated her. She's already had a son. She tells them what has taken place during the night and that Ajax now sees his actions. And she mentions her fears about what is going to happen to her if Ajax takes, violent vengeance upon himself for what he has done. So Tecmessa is saying, this is a little bit of the play. She says to the chorus, which, if the choice were given you, would you choose? To distress your friends and have joy yourself, or to share the grief of friends who grieve? Because Ajax now is grieving. He is hurt. He is wounded by his own actions. His anger has gone astray because of what Athena did to him, and now has led to his own lowering of social status. The chorus says, the twofold sorrow is certainly the greater evil. And Tecmessa says, then we are ruined now, though the plague is past. And the chorus says, what are you talking about? And she says, that man, that is Ajax, while afflicted, found joy for himself in the dire fantasies that held him, though his presence distressed us who were sane. But now, since he has had pause and rest from the sickness, he has been utterly subjected to lowly anguish, and we similarly grieve no less than before. Surely then, these are two sorrows instead of one. There is the sorrow of Ajax, and there is the sorrow of everybody around him. Ajax himself says that he has been violated. Hubriste is the Greek term there. And, we get the word hubris at the core of that. Hubris, we usually think of as sort of arrogance, but it also means doing something to another person because of your arrogance. And he still wishes evil to Odysseus, but he recognizes that it is a god, Athena, who is bringing him to his doom. And he says, what shall I do when I'm hated by the gods, abhorred by the Greek forces, and detested by all Troy and all these plains? He's trying to figure out, how can I respond to my anger breaking out and going astray? And so he says, some enterprise must be sought whereby I may prove to my aged father that his son is not gutless. The options for a noble man are only two: either live with honor, which is no longer an option for him, or make a quick and honorable death. So Ajax orders that his son be taken to his parents and given his shield. And he's resolved to end things and says, I no longer owe anything to these gods. They have essentially betrayed me. But he also says something quite interesting. He gives a final speech to his followers where he talks about human beings. He says us, who mean learning self-restraint, sophronein, to exercise self-restraint or temperance. And he suggests momentarily that he will bow before the gods and the Atreides, those who have awarded the honor and the arms to Odysseus. He goes off stage, and then his brother shows up, Teucer, and he says, the Greeks not only are looking for Ajax and they want to kill him, but they also first jeered at me, then they threw stones, and then swords were drawn. They were going to kill me until the older men calmed down the Greek crowd. So you notice what's happening here. The Greeks are angry in response to Ajax's own response of anger, aren't they? They want to do him in and do him harm. And we're told that Ajax has gone to get rid of his anger at the gods below. And again, we see the term holos being used there for anger. And then the messenger tells them that Ajax should have stayed in the tent, and tells us a little story about anger as well. So up until this point, we've got anger, Ajax, right? Anger of the Greeks. But now we get an anger before this that explains Athena's actions. Athena herself felt anger, orge in this case, at Ajax. Why? Because she offered him help in fighting against the Trojans, telling him to raise a murderous hand. And he basically says, you go help out the other Greeks. I got this handled. I can take care of it myself. So that might have been the right thing to do in a certain way, but it ticks off Athena. And that's why she did what she did, to interfere with his own anger. So now we've got anger in a number of different ways. Then we get this scene where Ajax himself is going to die. And here, if you remember last time, we talked about the Furies, these Greek spirits of the underworld that come to impose retribution on those who take the lives of their own kin. In this case, we actually see Ajax invoking the Furies. He says, my miserable life is destroyed by the Atreidae, the sons of Atreus. Come, swift and punishing Furies, devour the assembled army and spare nothing. So he's cursing all of the Greeks. Meanwhile, Tecmessa, it mentions that Ajax's father is an angry man. And interestingly, there's two different anger terms that are getting used here. She says that he is an aner dus orgos, meaning that he's a man whose anger is bad, right? Dus means bad, and orgos is coming from orge. And then she says his rage seeks quarrels without cause. Pros uden eis erin thumumenos. Thumumenos is getting angry as well. And that over nothing, in relation to nothing. Pros uden is how he will get angry. And then Menelaus shows up on the scene. Teucer is there as well, his brother. And now we're going to get a clash between the Greeks, represented by Menelaus, and Teucer, who is the half-brother of Ajax. And Menelaus, in something that kind of echoes what happens with another play of Sophocles that you might remember, is going to order that as a betrayer, Ajax's corpse should not be buried, but should be left to be devoured by the birds. And he tells this to Teucer and says, do not inflame my rage. And again, they use menos to describe that. And Teucer says, this is the wrong thing to do. The gods require that he have a proper burial. Ajax was not your subject, Menelaus. He was a free man fulfilling an oath. You're the guy who actually got us all in trouble with your, Helen, who couldn't stay home. And now they're arguing with each other. And they're not just arguing about that. They're also arguing about who is actually a great warrior or not. And then Menelaus tells him, and again, we see anger being talked about. What a tongue you have. What dreadful anger. Thumos, again here, it actually feeds. And Menelaus will leave. Teucer orders the burial to begin. Agamemnon shows up. And if you know anything about Agamemnon, he is a rageful guy and very arrogant. He's also the war leader of the Greeks. And he talks a lot of trash and insults Teucer, saying he's a slave and a son of a barbarian mother. And, Teucer reminds Agamemnon that Ajax was a hero on their side and that Teucer was at his side. And there's insults going back and forth. And what is going to lead to the resolution of this? Odysseus shows up. And Odysseus, in a certain sense, was part of the cause of the quarrel to begin with. But Odysseus is going to do something. And here's where we can get into some discussion. So think about what questions you want to ask or what comments you want to make, and I'll address them after I tell you about what Odysseus does, which shows you something about at least Sophocles' understanding of this guy. Odysseus arrives and he ends up giving counsel. And he actually tells Agamemnon, "Oh, I don't think you're in the right on this one. You're getting insulted because you're insulting. And so it's kind of hypocritical for you to be concerned about somebody else insulting you when you're being a jerk yourself." And then he says, "In the name of the gods, do not let yourself so ruthlessly cast this man out unburied. Do not in any way let the violence of your hatred overcome you so much that you trample justice underfoot." And now he's going to give his own example. And this is a very powerful ethical appeal. "To me, too, this man was once the most hostile enemy in the army from the day on which I beat him for possession of Achilles' arms. Yet, for all that he was hostile towards me, I would not dishonor him in return or refuse to admit that in all our Greek force at Troy, he was, in my view, the best and bravest, excepting Achilles. It would not be just then that he should be dishonored by you. It is not he, but the laws given by the gods that you would damage. When a good man is dead, there is no justice in doing him harm, not even if you hate him." So he's talking about overcoming this rivalry, this relation of enemy to enemy, and recognizing the requirements of justice, and not just a justice in terms of oaths or agreements, but a justice that is in terms of desert, of who merits what, and recognizing that. And notice this. One of the things that anger tends to do to us that we've noticed in other discussions is it blinds us to justice while making use of a certain limited conception of justice. Agamemnon, Menelaus think they're doing the right thing. They're wrong about that, Odysseus is saying, in wanting to expose the corpse. Ajax was, in a certain sense, doing the right thing. And Odysseus is even recognizing this by being upset that he didn't get the arms of Achilles. But where he went wrong was deciding to take vengeance on all of the Greeks. Odysseus is overcoming this. So in a certain way, he represents the rational part of a human being, recognizing our human fallibility. Now, notice how it's actually going to close, where we have an overcoming of anger. Agamemnon will leave and say, you guys do whatever the hell you're going to do. Odysseus says, "I am ready to be Teucer's friend as much as I was once his enemy. And I would like to join in the burying of your dead and share your labors, omitting no service which mortals should render to their best and bravest warriors." And Odysseus and Teucer become friends. There's provisos. Teucer says, you can't touch the body because Ajax wouldn't want you to be doing that, but feel free to join in on this with me. So what we see here is a very interesting approach to anger and how it's overcome. And so I think this is really quite a valuable play that often isn't attended to. So before we go on to Medea, any reactions, questions, comments that you would like me to respond to, clarifications that you're looking at, insights that you'd like to express. I'm happy to hear them, to entertain them, to make sense of them as best as we can. Again, I don't think that there is somewhere to us, but I think it's quite a valuable piece for making sense of this difficult ocean. I'll take a little sip of coffee while I'm waiting to see if anybody's got anything they want to respond about. No, it doesn't look like I'm seeing any things in the chat, unless this is. No, it looks like it's working right. Although the interface is still acting up a bit and showing me the time in 5 minute or 5 second intervals, which is a little bit strange. But all right, well, let's talk about Medea then. And I think this is a much more famous play, in part because ancient philosophers have often talked about how important this particular play was for understanding not just anger, but the capacity of anger to overcome us. It's also an interesting one in that the main character is a woman. The Greeks were, definitely a patriarchal society, tended to view women as, less powerful, less intellectual, less morally capable than men. Although the men weren't often setting a great example in Greek tragedy. Medea kind of stands out, and she's an unusual person. She is a princess in her own right of a barbarian kingdom of Colchis. She's a sorceress. She's very powerful. As a matter of fact, you could say that she, if we want to use contemporary parlance, she and Jason are not really a couple, because he is in some respects the weakest and most pathetic of the Greek heroes. He needs Hercules to help him out a lot of the way in the Argos, and as we're going to see, he's kind of a schmuck in many respects. So we're going to talk about the rage of Medea, and it's mentioned again using these terms like orge, anger, holos, rage, thumos gets brought up all the time in this. And one of the great lines is terrible and hard to heal is the wrath that comes when kin join in conflict with kin. And it's orge there, wrath, anger. This is a family struggle where they are fighting against each other in certain ways. So the Medea opens up, again, as Greek tragedies do, right in the middle of things. Medea is in a terrible and troubled emotional state of holus, of rage, because something has happened. She's been married to Jason, and she's had children with him as well. Jason has decided that he wants to set her aside, which also means setting the children aside and marrying a new bride, a younger bride, Glauce, the daughter of King Creon of Corinth. And, don't we see this often enough in our own society when men will abandon their wives and oftentimes their entire family to go off and find somebody younger. They use language of like finding a newer model. Sometimes they say trading up, but generally it isn't trading up, because the younger ones typically aren't as wise and experienced as the older ones, right? So in her view, she has been wronged, deeply wronged. And she talks about having a heavy, deep, brooding mind or heart, and that she won't accept this sort of insult or dishonoring. And we see that it's not just her heart that is heavy, but also her anger. Baruthumon organ, a very interesting way of combining two anger words together. Baruthumon, thumos is anger, right? It's also in some philosophers, the part we get angry with. Barus means deep or heavy. And then organ is rage or anger as well. And in her own lines, she's so angry that at first she expresses the wish that she could die. And then she prays that some reckoning of death and destruction would come to Jason and to Glauce and Creon and their house. Now, this is a dangerous thing to say. She's in somebody else's kingdom, somebody else's political community, and everyone knows what's going on, and she is not happy with it. She's not accepting it lying down. Now, in her own view, as well as in the view of the chorus and its leader, Medea is right to be angry and even to wish to seek revenge on Jason, her unfaithful husband. Why is this the case? Well, she betrayed out of love for Jason before he even was her husband. She even killed her own brother as they were pursuing in order to facilitate Jason and her escape after they had stolen the golden fleece from Colchis. She says that not only did she make it possible for Jason to attain the thing that he needed, the golden fleece, she kept him from dying in the process. So he owes her not just the success of his venture, not just the restoration of his own kingdom, but his very own life. To the Greeks, she's considered to be a barbarian, but she's actually from a semi-divine lineage. Her family is descended from Helios, the sun god, so she's not somebody to be treated badly. And she talks about bearing him children. And then she says something very interesting. She says, I've given you children, and bearing a child is 3 times the feat of going into a battle. So she's saying that women, in a certain sense, are more courageous than men who fight. Why? Because childbirth is painful and dangerous and could lead to your own death. So when we look at that, it kind of seems like if anybody has good grounds to be angry, it would be Medea, wouldn't it? She is the one who has the greatest reason, the greatest charge for being an angry person and taking revenge. Now, the very fact that she is so powerful and is known to be a sorceress makes her a threat, not just to Jason, but to the king, Creon. And this brings him into full conflict with her because he is afraid for his own daughter, and then he becomes angry at her. So we see once again, anger tends to beget anger in at least some of the people towards whom the anger is directed at. And so we get this encounter with Creon. So Creon says, you, Medea, scowling with rage against your husband, I order you to leave this land and go into exile, taking your 2 children with you. And instantly, I am the executor of this decree. I will not return home again until I expel you from this land. And then Medea says, I'm ill-treated. Why are you exiling me, Creon? And he says, I am afraid that you will do deadly harm to my daughter. Many indications of this combine. You are a clever woman and skilled in many evil arts. You are smarting with the loss of your husband's love. And I hear that you are threatening. This is the report people bring to harm the bride, her father, and her husband. So I shall take precautions before the event. It's better for me to incur your hatred now, woman, than to be soft and incur it later on. And she says, some things to him, and then he says, your words are soothing to listen to, but I'm afraid in your heart you're plotting some harm. And he calls her a hot-tempered woman, And he says, is easier to guard against a clever woman who keeps her own counsel. So she can't even, we often say, I can't win for losing, right? No matter what she does, she is being viewed as a threat. If she's angry and she's saying, I'm going to take revenge, she's a threat. If she says, I won't take revenge, I'll get over this, Creon's like, you're planning something. So then we get some interactions between Medea and Jason himself. Both of them make cases to each other. It's kind of a judicial sort of discussion, except they're arguing with each other, as couples often do. And they wind up in a state of disagreement. Jason is trying to calm Medea. And then we're going to see a seeming reconciliation, but it's not a reconciliation. So in the first encounter, Jason, as we often say, throws fuel on the fire. He gives her more to be angry over. He claims the entire situation could be afforded. Her unreasonable and unpredictable rage has angered Creon, and Jason is the good guy. He's interceded for her and the children, and he tells her the sacrifices she made were not his doing, so he's not responsible for them. It's hers or love's, so he doesn't bear responsibility for that. And then he argues that in his actions, he's being wise and self-controlled and a friend to her and the children. And then finally caps it by saying, I didn't wrong you by remarrying. I'm trying to secure a place for your children in Corinth, bringing them into the family house. Now, what happens to you? Your collateral damage, so to speak. So this makes her even more angry, right? And she says, I will accept no help from your friends, nor will I take anything from you. Don't offer it. The gifts of a base man, a ignoble man, bring no benefit. So what we've got here is not just a clash of emotions, not just a personal conflict, not just a matter of domestic dispute, but a real discussion about what's expedient or useful versus what is right or just. Medea has justice on her side insofar as she hasn't done anything yet. She is in the right and Jason is in the wrong, even after he's given his arguments. But this leads to her becoming even more angry. And in the second encounter between the two of them, she is going to portray herself as seeing the error of her anger, which is a bit of a blind, right? She says that it's befitting that he put up with her anger, considering all of the actions of love in the past on her part. And then she says, your intentions and actions were reasonable. I should have gone along and welcomed them as well-intentioned and beneficial. And she actually calls her own anger pointless. Maten thumumene, right? I got angry over nothing. Mates is empty. And she says that it's finished, but she is not finished with her anger. And the seeming reconciliation is actually part of her plan for taking revenge on those who have wronged her. So what is she going to do? What is the retaliation or retribution? So first, she gives a bridal gift to Glauce, a poisoned bit of clothing. Glauce puts it on, immediately starts burning and dies. Creon comes to his daughter's aid and is also poisoned and dies in horrible pain himself. So now we've got two main characters off the scene. Jason is now left with no patron, no daddy-in-law, right? No wife, no alliance. So she's taken all of that away from him. Now, if she'd stopped there, maybe that would have been acceptable. But she infamously goes much further, at least in Euripides' play. So here's what she actually says, talking with the chorus leader. Now I shall tell you of all of my designs. Hear then words that will give you no pleasure. I shall send one of my servants and ask Jason to come to see me. When he arrives, as shall speak soothing words to him. And he goes on, right, and talks about the gifts and all that. And then he says, ah, me, I groan at what a deed I must do next. I shall kill my children. And notice she doesn't say our children, his children. I shall kill my children. There is no one who can rescue them. When I have utterly confounded the whole house of Jason, I shall leave the land in flight from the murder of my own dear sons, having committed a most unholy deed. The laughter of one's enemies is unendurable, my friends. Let that be as it will. What do I gain from living? I have no fatherland, no house, no means to turn aside misfortune. My mistake was when I left my father's house, persuaded by the words of a Greek. This man, a god being my helper, will pay the price of his deeds to me. He shall never from this day see his children by me alive, nor will he beget children by his new bride, since that wretch must die a wretched death by my poisons. Now notice this line. Let no one think me weak, contemptible, untroublesome. No, quite the opposite. Hurtful to foes, to friends kindly. Such persons live a life of greatest glory. And the chorus leader says, since you've shared this plan with me, and since I wish to help you and uphold the laws of society, I urge you not to do this deed. And then Medea says, it cannot be otherwise. I excuse you for speaking thus, since you have not suffered as I have. And then the chorus leader says, will you bring yourself to kill your own offspring? And she says, it is the way to hurt my husband most. So she's resolved on it. And she does kill the son she's born to Jason. Now Jason arrives, hoping to save the children. And in his own anger, he would avenge them. But she is already taking flight. She's a sorceress in a chariot drawn by dragons. And the play concludes with a lengthy, bitter, and inconclusive argument between Jason and Medea. He calls on the gods, because he can't do it, to punish her. And she retorts that they will not listen to the prayers of an oath breaker. And this is where it ends. So, again, we see that anger leads to other expressions of anger. We see that anger can go too far. Now, in Medea's case, there isn't any god who's stealing her reason away so that her revenge doesn't land on the people that she intends it to hit. Instead, what we see is it is her own family that is destroyed in the process. Jason is left alive, but everything has been taken from him. His wife, his children, his new wife, his father-in-law, all of these sorts of matters. So we have here two different Greek tragedies in which we see similar depictions of anger using the same language, holos, thumos, ore. This doesn't coincide, of course, with what Plato and Aristotle we've discussed previously have made of anger, discussing these things. But there is a kind of continuity between what's happened in the earlier writers, particularly Homer and Hesiod, right? And what is going to be happening with anger with these more theoretical treatments. So that's all that I have for you. Now is a great opportunity for any sort of discussion that you want to have. I haven't seen any questions or comments yet other than Mark saying hello. But if anybody would like to join in and ask something or say something, I'm perfectly happy to entertain any questions or comments, insights, clarifications, discussions. What do you have about these? Otherwise, we'll finish up with the session, and we'll take this up again next month. But this time around, looking at some philosophical treatments of anger rather than literary, as we've done the last few times. I'm not seeing any questions or comments, but then, the interface is acting wonky. So if they're there and I'm not seeing them, I certainly apologize about that. Let's see if doing a pop out helps. No, that's the same. So I think a lot of people just came along for the ride, perhaps, and maybe in this first one. Shayra says, when will the next session be conducted? You can always find that by going to the Reason.io events calendar or looking at YouTube, where these are already scheduled. And you can look at my Facebook page as well, where we have these as events. Any questions, comments about Medea or Ajax or Greek tragedy more generally? The views on anger, the vocabulary being used and invoked. I'm not seeing any, so I think we'll draw this one to a successful close. And as I mentioned, you can find when the next ones will be offered. They're right there in the channel on the main page. You just scroll down and you see upcoming live streams for this and for other events. On my Facebook page, the events as well, and the Reason.io events calendar. I always put these things on there in advance as well. So I will see you next time, and hopefully we'll have a bit more intense discussion of what is going on in these texts. So I'll see you, and thanks for attending.